A thrilling story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. He took her out of a maid's uniform and displayed her as a trophy, but went mad with jealousy when everyone desired her. Now, caught between pride and obsession, he must decide to free her or destroy her. A story of forbidden love, power, and secrets that could ruin an entire family. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by this story. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. New York City had a way of swallowing people whole, as if the city were a living organism that fed on dreams and spat out realities. In the Upper East Side, where buildings rose like concrete and glass giants, the Montgomery Mansion stood out like a fortress from the previous century. 3 floors of marble and ostentation, surrounded by walls that didn't just protect, but reminded everyone outside exactly where the common world ended and the empire began. Isabel Carter knew every inch of that house since she learned to walk. Not as an heiress, not as a visitor, but as a shadow. Daughter of Connie, the housekeeper who had dedicated 20 years of her life to keeping those rooms impeccable, she grew up between whispered orders and silences that weighed more than words. She learned early that there are places where you can be without ever belonging, where you can see without being seen, where you can hear stories that will never be yours. The house routine functioned like a Swiss clock. At 5 in the morning, Connie was already up, preparing the coffee that would be served in French porcelain that cost more than an entire year's salary. Isabel, even when small, helped in silence, not because she was forced to, but because it was natural, like breathing, like existing without disturbing. "Izzy, girl, you need to study," her mother would say in the few hours they sat together in the small studio apartment attached to the main mansion. "Education is the only thing they can't take away from you." But even when she said this, Connie looked at her calloused hands, at the uniform that never left her body, at the life she had chosen in exchange for security. And Isabel understood, without anyone needing to explain, that some prisons are too golden to be abandoned. The Montgomery family consisted of figures who seemed to have stepped out of an old portrait. Charles Montgomery, the patriarch, was a man of few smiles and many demands. He had built his empire in civil construction, erecting buildings throughout the country, but always returning to that house where he ruled like an absolutist king. His wife, Margaret, was a woman who had transformed elegance into armor. She never addressed the staff directly, communicating through looks and gestures that everyone had learned to interpret as law. But it was Andrew who most intrigued Isabel. Eldest son, apparent heir, he moved through the house with a natural authority, as if he had been born knowing that the world belonged to him. 15 years older than her, Andrew was a constant yet distant presence. As a child, Isabel observed him from afar, fascinated by the way he spoke on the phone, how he handled important papers, how everyone around seemed to diminish in his presence. "Don't stare at the young man," Connie would warn, but never harshly. It was more a gentle reminder of the invisible boundaries separating their worlds. Everyone in their place, Izzy. Everyone in their place. There was also Victoria, Andrew's younger sister, a woman who cultivated cruelty, like others cultivate roses. Beautiful, intelligent, but possessing an acidity that corroded everything around her. Victoria had the gift of turning any conversation into a battlefield, any situation into an opportunity to humiliate, and her favorite targets were always those who couldn't fight back. During adolescence, Isabel developed an almost supernatural ability to become invisible. When the family received important visitors, she disappeared. When there were parties, she took refuge in the back of the house. When dinners extended and voices rose in discussions about politics or business, she retreated to her room, where she studied by the light of a weak lamp, nurturing dreams that seemed to belong to someone else. Connie had always insisted that her daughter attend a quality public school, even if it meant waking up 2 hours earlier, to accompany her there. "You're going to be different," she would say, combing the girl's curly hair with a delicacy she reserved only for those moments. "You'll have choices I never had." At school, Isabel was an exemplary student, quiet, dedicated, always with her homework done. But she was also the girl who could never invite friends over, who made excuses not to attend parties, who lied about where she lived to avoid uncomfortable questions. She lived in 2 parallel worlds, and the bridge between them was made of silence and secrets. When she turned 18, Isabel had become a young woman of discreet but striking beauty, not the kind of beauty that screamed for attention, but one that revealed itself gradually, like a well-kept secret. Her brown hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders. Her honey-colored eyes carried a depth that intrigued those who dared to look long enough. But more than physical beauty, there was something in her posture, in her way of observing the world that caught attention, a mixture of shyness and determination, of vulnerability and inner strength. It was during this time that something changed in the house dynamic. Andrew, who at 33 had become his father's right hand in business, began to notice Isabel differently. They weren't obvious looks, they weren't direct approaches, but there was something in the air when he passed through the corridor and found her organizing documents, something in the way he paused when he heard her voice answering the phone. "Izzy is growing up," Victoria commented one day during family lunch. There was poison in her voice, disguised as casual observation. Who would have thought that Connie's daughter would turn into such an interesting young lady? Margaret raised her eyes from her plate, the kind of look that analyzed and catalogued threats. Connie needs to be careful. A pretty girl in a house with a single man always brings problems. Charles didn't comment, but his silence was more eloquent than any word. Andrew, meanwhile, continued eating as if the conversation didn't concern him, but Isabel, who was serving lunch, noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided looking in her direction. That same night, Connie called her daughter for a serious conversation. They were in the small living room of the studio apartment, surrounded by the few belongings they called their own. "My daughter," she began, and there was a heavy sadness in her voice. "It's time for you to think about your future." "What do you mean, Mom?" "You finished high school. You're 18. You can't stay here forever." Isabel felt the ground move beneath her feet. "But I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave you." "It's not about wanting, Izzy. It's about needing to." Connie held her daughter's hands and they were cold, trembling slightly. "You're a smart, beautiful girl with your whole life ahead of you. You can't waste that being a shadow in someone else's house. But you're here. Your life is here. My life is this because I chose it to be. But you have other options. You have to have." They talked until late at night, planning an exit that seemed both necessary and impossible. Connie had saved money over the years, enough to pay for a few months' rent and college for her daughter. "You'll study business," she decided. "It's a course that always leads to employment. You're going to be independent." But fate, as always, had other plans. The next morning, Connie woke up with a pain in her chest that knocked her to the kitchen floor. The heart attack was severe, but not fatal. When the ambulance arrived, Isabel had already made the first decisions that would define the course of her life. There would be no college, there would be no exit, there would be no choices. St. Mary's Hospital in central New York became Isabel's second home in the following weeks. Between corridors that smelled of disinfectant and rooms where hope and despair walked hand in hand, she learned a cruel lesson about reality. Health is an expensive privilege, and being right is not always enough when you're poor. "Your mother needs surgery," explained the doctor, a middle-aged man trying to balance professionalism and compassion. "It's a delicate procedure, but necessary. Without it, the next heart attack could be fatal." "How much does it cost?" asked Isabel, although she already knew the answer would be an impossible number. "Through insurance, it could take months to be approved. Private, it's around $60,000. $60,000. The value echoed in Isabel's head like a sentence. It was more money than Connie had earned in 2 entire years. It was more money than they had seen together in their entire lives. During the days that followed, Isabel divided her time between the hospital and the Montgomery mansion, where she informally took over her mother's tasks. It wasn't an official decision, but everyone understood that someone needed to keep the house running, and she knew every detail of the routine, every demand, every quirk of the employers. It was during one of these mornings, when she was organizing documents in Charles's office, that Andrew found her. "How is your mother?" he asked, standing at the door, watching her work. "Stable," she replied, without raising her eyes from the papers. "Thank you for asking. You're taking over her duties. Temporarily, until she recovers." Andrew took a few steps into the office. There was something different in his behavior, a hesitation that wasn't common for him. "Isabel, I need to talk to you." She finally looked at him, and it was as if she was seeing him for the first time. Andrew was a handsome man. She had always known that. But at that moment, with the morning light illuminating his features, with that intense gaze fixed on her, he seemed almost dangerous. Dangerous in a way she couldn't define. "About what?" she asked, her voice weaker than intended. "About your future. About a proposal." Isabel felt her heart quicken. "What kind of proposal?" "I need a personal assistant. Someone trustworthy. Who knows the house, who understands how things work here." He paused, studying her reaction. "Someone like you." "I don't have experience with that kind of work." "You don't need it. I would teach you. The salary would be good. Very good." Isabel closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, Andrew was closer. Too close. "How much?" $10,000 a month, plus benefits. Comprehensive health insurance for you and your mother. It was an absurd amount. 3 times more than Connie earned. Enough money to pay for the surgery in a few months, to ensure her mother had the best possible treatment. It was the salvation she hadn't dared to hope for. "Why me?" she asked, although part of her already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. Andrew took time to respond. When he spoke, there was something dangerous in his voice, something that made Isabel shiver. "Because you're discreet, because you understand silence, and because I trust you." Trust. The word sounded strange coming from him. Isabel had grown up in that house, had observed Andrew for years and had never seen him truly trust anyone. He was a man who lived surrounded by walls, who kept everyone at a safe distance, who governed more by fear than by affection. "I need to think," she said. "Of course, but don't take too long. The offer has an expiration date." When Andrew left the office, Isabel remained there, motionless, trying to process what had just happened. There was something in the offer that didn't fit, something that triggered alarms in her head. Andrew Montgomery wasn't a man of generous gestures. Each of his moves was calculated. Each decision had a purpose, and she couldn't understand what the purpose was behind that offer. But when she visited her mother that afternoon and saw Connie connected to machines, with a pale face and eyes full of pain, Isabel understood that purposes were a luxury for those who had choices, and she had no choices. She never had. "Mom," she whispered, holding Connie's cold hand, "I'm going to accept Andrew's offer." "What offer?" "He offered me a job, personal assistant, with a salary that will pay for your surgery." Connie tried to sit up, but she was too weak. "Izzy, my daughter, you need to be careful. Men like Andrew don't do anything without a reason." "I know, Mom. I know. Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise." But while saying this, Isabel wondered if she had promised something she couldn't keep, because there was something in Andrew's gaze, in the way he observed her, that suggested the danger had already begun, and she, without choices, was about to surrender to it. The next morning, Isabel knocked on Andrew's office door with her decision made. He greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, as if he already knew what the answer would be. "I accept," she said simply. "Excellent. You start tomorrow. We have a lot of work ahead." And so, without ceremony, without grand speeches, Isabel Carter became Andrew Montgomery's personal assistant. She didn't yet know that she had just signed the first contract in a war that would be waged in silence, where the weapons would be glances and the wounds would be invisible. She didn't know that she had just surrendered to the man who had been watching her for years, waiting for the right moment to bring her close. She didn't know that her life, which had always been a struggle for survival, was about to become a struggle for her soul. But perhaps deep down a part of her knew. Perhaps that's why her hands trembled when she signed the contract. Perhaps that's why when Andrew greeted her with a handshake that lasted longer than necessary, she felt she was sealing much more than a professional agreement. New York continued out there, swallowing dreams and spitting out realities. But inside the Montgomery mansion, a new reality was beginning to take shape. A reality made of charged silences, of glances that lasted longer than they should, of a tension that grew like an approaching storm. And Isabel, who had spent her entire life learning to be invisible, was about to discover that some dangers don't come from those who despise us, but from those who never stop watching us. Isabel's first day of work as Andrew Montgomery's personal assistant began before dawn. She woke at 5 in the morning, the same time she had always awakened to help her mother, but this time for a completely different purpose. There was a subtle but significant change in the air of the mansion, as if the house knew that the rules had changed. Andrew was waiting for her in the main office, an environment she knew from a distance but had never inhabited. It was an imposing room, with mahogany shelves that rose to the ceiling, a conference table that could accommodate 12 people, and enormous windows overlooking the inner garden. The smell was of leather, varnished wood, and a discreet masculine cologne that she would soon learn to associate with his presence. "Punctuality is the first rule," said Andrew, without raising his eyes from the documents he was examining. "We don't tolerate lateness, ever." "I understand," replied Isabel, standing near the door, unsure of where she should position herself. "Sit down." He indicated a chair on the other side of the desk. "Let's establish the basic rules." As she sat down, Isabel observed Andrew more carefully. He wore a dark grey suit, impeccably cut, which highlighted his erect posture and broad shoulders. His brown hair was perfectly styled, and when he finally raised his eyes to her, Isabel felt a shiver that she couldn't identify as fear or something more dangerous. "You will be responsible for my personal and professional schedule," he began, his voice firm and controlled. "All appointments go through you. All calls go through you. Everyone who wants to see me needs your approval first." "Right. You will attend all important meetings, take notes, organize documents. When I travel, you will travel with me. When I work late, you will stay late. Your availability must be complete." Isabel nodded, although the word complete made her slightly furrow her brows. There was something in the way he spoke that suggested her private life was about to cease to exist. "There are specific rules about attire," continued Andrew, and this time his eyes lingered on her for a few seconds longer. "You will receive a monthly allowance to dress appropriately. Nothing flashy, nothing inappropriate. Discreet elegance is what's expected." "I understand." "About personal relationships," he made a significant pause, "I expect you to maintain total discretion about everything you see or hear in this house. Confidentiality agreements will be signed. Any violation will result in immediate dismissal and legal proceedings." The conversation continued for almost an hour, with Andrew detailing every aspect of the job with almost obsessive precision. There were rules about how to answer the phone, how to organize documents, how to behave in meetings, how to deal with clients and suppliers. But there were also more personal, more intimate rules, which made Isabel feel as if she were being molded to fit a specific format. "You will have lunch with me when there are no external commitments," he said. "We need to discuss the day's schedule, review pending matters. It's more efficient that way. And if I already have other plans?" The question came out before Isabel could contain herself. Andrew stared at her with an expression she couldn't completely decipher, but which made her regret having asked. "Do you have other plans?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "No, I just meant, hypothetically. Hypothetically, you are paid to be available. Hypothetically, this job is your priority. Hypothetically, you shouldn't have other plans that conflict with your obligations here." The silence that followed was heavy. Isabel realized she had just received her first lesson about the limits of her new position. She wasn't just an employee. She was an extension of Andrew's will, a piece on a chessboard that he completely controlled. "Sorry," she murmured. "That's not what I meant." "Good. Then we understand each other." The first days were a difficult adjustment. Isabel found herself immersed in a completely new world, where each phone call was a negotiation. Each document had crucial importance. Each meeting involved sums of money she could hardly imagine. The Montgomery Company wasn't just a construction firm. It was an empire that extended throughout America, with projects in New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Miami, and Los Angeles. Andrew was a demanding boss, but not unfair. He explained each process, corrected mistakes with patience, praised when she demonstrated competence. But there was something in the way he observed her, especially when she wasn't paying attention, that made her uncomfortable. They were glances that lasted longer than necessary, that seemed to study not just her work, but her herself. "You're adapting well," he commented on a Thursday after a particularly complicated meeting with Japanese investors. "You have a facility for learning." "Thank you," replied Isabel, organizing the documents that had been discussed. "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" The question caught her off guard. She looked at him, trying to understand if it was a disguised order or a genuine invitation. "Dinner? I have an informal meeting with some partners at the Carlyle. It would be good to have you there to take notes, observe how they behave. Important information sometimes emerges in casual conversations. Of course, it's part of the job." "Exactly. It's part of the job. But when Andrew smiled, there was something in his expression that suggested it might not be just work. And Isabel, who was learning to read the nuances of his behavior, felt a chill in her stomach that she couldn't explain. The Carlisle was a completely different world from anything Isabel had experienced. Located in the Upper East Side, it was a temple of New York high gastronomy, where every detail breathed luxury and sophistication. When they arrived, the maitre d' led them to a reserved table, and Isabel noticed that all eyes turned to them. "Does he always bring his secretary?" she heard someone comment quietly. "She's not a secretary," another voice replied. "She's a personal assistant. There's a difference." Isabel felt her face heat up. It wasn't exactly embarrassment, but an acute awareness that she was being observed, judged, catalogued. Andrew, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease, as if this were his natural habitat. "Ignore it," he murmured, coming closer to her as the waiter served the wine. "They have nothing better to do." During dinner, Isabel observed Andrew interact with the partners. He was different there, more expansive, more charismatic. He laughed at jokes, told stories, negotiated million-dollar contracts as if he were discussing the weather. It was fascinating to watch him work, the way he conducted conversations, how he obtained information without appearing to be investigating. "And the new assistant?" asked Robert Drummond, one of the oldest partners, looking directly at Isabel. "Are you adapting to our Andrew's madness?" "Very well," she replied, maintaining a professional tone. "It's a challenging but stimulating environment." "Be careful not to get addicted," another partner laughed. "Working with Andrew is like using drugs. It's difficult at first, but then you can't stop." Andrew didn't laugh at the joke, his eyes fixed on Isabel, studying her reaction. There was something possessive in that look, something that made her shift uncomfortably in her chair. "Isabel is very competent," he said, his voice colder than before. "And discreet. Rare qualities these days." The return home was made in silence. Andrew drove his BMW through the streets of New York with the same precision with which he conducted business, and Isabel watched the city pass by the window, lost in thought. There was something in the way he had defended her at the restaurant that intrigued her. It wasn't just professional protection. It was something more personal, more intimate. "You did well today," he said, finally breaking the silence as they stopped at a traffic light on Fifth Avenue. "Thank you. But I need you to understand something." He turned to her, and in the reflection of the city lights, his eyes seemed darker. "When we're in public, you're not just my assistant. You represent me. Your words, your gestures, your appearance, everything reflects on me." "I understand. I hope so. Because I'm going to invest a lot in you, Isabel. Time, money, trust. And I expect the same return." There was something in the word invest that made her shiver, as if she were a commodity, something that could be bought, molded, controlled. But when the light turned green and Andrew started driving again, she wondered if she wasn't imagining things. Perhaps it was just fatigue, the pressure of a new world, the anxiety of wanting to do everything right. The following weeks established a routine that gradually became natural. Isabel arrived at 7 in the morning, reviewed the day's schedule, prepared the necessary documents for each meeting. Andrew arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, always impeccable, always punctual. They had coffee together while he received the first briefings of the day, and Isabel learned to anticipate his needs, to predict his moods, to navigate his demands. But there were moments when the line between professional and personal became dangerously thin, when he asked her to stay later, even when there was no urgent work, when he took her to lunches that didn't involve business, when she found him observing her work with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Are you happy here?" he asked on a rainy afternoon when they were alone in the office. "Yes," she replied without raising her eyes from the computer. "It's a good job." "I didn't ask about the job. I asked about you." Isabel finally looked at him. Andrew was leaning back in his chair, studying her with that intensity she was beginning to recognize as dangerous. "I'm adapting," she said carefully. "Your mother is better?" "Yes. The surgery was a success." "She's recovering well." "Great, you must be relieved." "Very, thank you for everything. Without this job, I wouldn't have been able to pay for the treatment." Andrew nodded, but there was something in his expression that suggested he knew exactly the power he had over her. Gratitude made her vulnerable, and he seemed aware of this. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You deserve it. You're competent, dedicated, loyal, qualities I value greatly. Loyalty is important, she agreed. Yes, especially when working so close to someone. Professional intimacy requires mutual trust. The word intimacy hung in the air between them like a promise or a threat. Isabel felt her heart quicken, but couldn't identify if it was fear or anticipation. It was during this time that Victoria Montgomery began to show interest in the new dynamic of the house. She appeared in the office without warning, always with some excuse, but clearly to observe the interaction between her brother and the assistant. "Such dedication," she commented on one of these days, finding Isabel working alone in the office. "Even when Andrew isn't here, you continue working." "There's a lot of work to organize," replied Isabel politely. "I imagine. My brother is very demanding, especially with people close to him." There was venom in Victoria's voice, disguised as casual conversation. Isabel remained focused on the documents, but could feel the evaluative gaze of the other woman. "Are you enjoying the work?" continued Victoria, sitting in the chair in front of the desk. "Yes, very much." "And the boss?" The question was asked with a malice that made Isabel finally raise her eyes. Victoria was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that reminded one of a predator playing with its prey. "Mr. Andrew is an excellent boss," she replied, maintaining a professional tone. "Mr. Andrew?" repeated Victoria, laughing. "How formal. You work so closely, spend so much time together. It would be natural for you to be more intimate." "Intimate? Friends? Confidants? You know." Isabel knew she was being tested, but couldn't completely understand the purpose of the test. "We maintain a professional relationship," she said. "Of course." "Professional." Victoria stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Just some advice from woman to woman. My brother is a complex man. He has specific needs, and he can be very generous to those who satisfy these needs." "I don't understand." "No? Too bad. Well, when you understand, remember that some gifts have a very high price." Victoria left the office, leaving Isabel disturbed and confused. There was something in the conversation that seemed like a warning, but also a temptation, as if she were being prepared for something that hadn't happened yet. That night, Isabel couldn't concentrate. During dinner with her mother, who was now at home recovering, she found herself thinking about Victoria's words, about the way Andrew observed her, about the growing intimacy developing between them. "Are you okay, daughter?" asked Connie, noticing her distraction. "I am, just tired." "How's work?" "Good." "Complicated, but good." Connie studied her daughter's face with the wisdom of someone who had spent decades observing the Montgomerys. "Izzy, you need to be careful." "Careful of what?" "Of men like Andrew. They're used to having everything they want. And when they want something, they don't measure consequences to get it. Mum, it's just work." "It's just work until it's not anymore. And when it stops being just work, you'll discover that you have no choice." Her mother's words echoed in Isabel's head all night. When she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of dark eyes watching her, of hands approaching without ever touching, of a voice whispering her name as if it were a prayer or a condemnation. The next morning, Andrew was different, more attentive, closer, more possessive. When she arrived at the office, he was already there, waiting. "We need to talk," he said, and there was something in his voice that made Isabel know her life was about to change again. "About what?" "About us. About this tension that's growing between us." "Tension? Don't pretend you don't feel it. Don't lie to me." Isabel felt the world move beneath her feet. The moment she feared and anticipated at the same time had arrived. The moment when boundaries would be tested, when rules would be broken, and when she would discover if she was strong enough to resist the man who watched her as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. "Mr. Andrew." "Andrew, just Andrew." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You know exactly what I'm talking about." He came closer, and Isabel could smell his cologne, feel the heat of his body, the intensity of his gaze. She was cornered between the desk and him, with no escape, no defense. "You fascinate me," he said, his voice hoarse. "Since you were a girl, but especially now. The way you move, how you speak, how you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. This is inappropriate. Inappropriate or inevitable." Isabel tried to move away, but he placed a hand on the desk, blocking her exit. He wasn't violent, but he was definitive, like everything he did. "You're my assistant," she said desperately. "You're much more than that. And we both know it." "No, we're not." "Then why do you tremble when I say your name? Why do your pupils dilate when you look at me? Why do you stay awake at night thinking about me?" Don't lie. I recognize desire when I see it, because I feel the same thing." The silence that followed was charged with a tension that seemed capable of igniting the air around them. Isabel knew she was at a crossroads. She could run, abandon everything, return to the life she knew, or she could stay and discover where this madness would lead her. "This is wrong," she murmured. "Maybe, but it's not uncommon, and it's not a crime. You're my boss. I depend on you. And I depend on you, more than I should." Andrew stepped back, giving her space to breathe. But his eyes remained fixed on her as if he could see through her soul. "I won't force anything," he said, "but I also won't pretend that I don't feel, that I don't want, that I don't need." "Need? You. Your presence, your attention, your—" "My what?" "Your choice. I want you to choose me. Not out of gratitude, not out of obligation, not out of fear. I want you to choose me because you want to." Isabel felt tears forming in her eyes. There was something in his vulnerability that touched her more deeply than any order or threat could do. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "Then don't decide now. Think, feel, observe. And when you know, tell me." Andrew left the office, leaving Isabel alone with her turbulent thoughts and a heart that beat out of rhythm. She knew she had just crossed an invisible line, that from that moment on, everything would be different. Outside, New York continued its chaotic dance, indifferent to the personal dramas unfolding inside mansions and offices. But inside the Montgomery office, a new phase was beginning. A phase where the boundaries between professional and personal would become increasingly thin, where power and desire would intertwine dangerously, where Isabel would discover that some choices change everything. And she still didn't know that the most difficult choice of her life was just beginning. The days following Andrew's confession were marked by a strange and dangerous dance. He maintained physical distance, but his presence became more intense, more enveloping. Each look lasted a few seconds longer. Each word seemed to carry a double meaning. Each silence vibrated with the tension of what had not been said. Isabel tried to focus on work, but found her mind constantly wandering to the conversation of that day. His words echoed in her head like a persistent echo. "I want you to choose me." It was a phrase that haunted and seduced her at the same time, a promise and a threat wrapped in silk. "You're different," observed Connie during dinner a few days later. "Quieter, more thoughtful." "I'm fine, Mum, just tired." "Tired or worried?" Isabel hesitated. Part of her wanted to tell her mother everything, to unburden herself about the confusion she felt, about the way Andrew made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. But another part knew that Connie would worry, that she might even advise her to quit the job. "Both," she finally admitted. "Is the work getting too difficult?" "It's not the work, it's—" Isabel stopped, trying to find words that wouldn't reveal too much. "It's complicated working so close to someone. You lose perspective." Connie nodded, as if she understood more than Isabel had said. "My daughter, you need to always remember who you are, no matter how much money you earn, no matter what worlds you know. You are Isabel Carter, Connie's daughter, and that's enough. Don't let anyone make you forget that." "I won't forget. I hope not. Because men like Andrew can be very convincing when they want something. And when they get it, sometimes they discover they didn't want it that much after all." Her mother's words were engraved in Isabel's mind, but they weren't enough to diminish the confusion she felt, especially when, the next morning, she found a present on her desk in the office. It was a small box wrapped in gold paper, with a card that simply said, "To remind you that you are special." Inside there was a delicate necklace, a white gold chain with a star-shaped pendant, studded with small diamonds. "Did you like it?" asked Andrew, appearing silently at the door. Isabel held the box with both hands as if it was something dangerous. "I can't accept this." "Why not?" "Because it's inappropriate. Because it's too expensive. Because you're afraid of what it means." She stared at him and saw in his eyes the same intensity that was becoming a constant. "It's not fear, it's common sense." "Common sense is overrated," he said, entering the office completely and closing the door behind him. Sometimes we need to trust our instincts. My instincts tell me to return this. And what else do your instincts tell you? The question was asked in a low, almost intimate voice that made Isabel feel a shiver run down her spine. She knew he was referring to something far beyond the necklace. That some things are too beautiful to be true, she finally replied. Or perhaps they're too true to be ignored. Andrew came closer, and she didn't back away. There was something magnetic in his proximity, something that defied all logic and morality. Isabel, if you give me a chance, I promise we'll find a way to make this work. There's no way to make this work. Yes, there is. Maybe not in the conventional way, maybe not in the way others expect, but there is. How? By escaping, leaving the country, starting a new life where no one knows us. You're talking about abandoning everything. I'm talking about choosing what's most important. And if I can't live with the guilt, and if you can't live without me? The question echoed between them like a challenge. Isabel knew she was at the limit, that any decision she made would irrevocably change everything. I need to get out of here, she said, abruptly standing up. Isabel, no, I need to think away from you, away from this house, away from all this. Where are you going? I don't know, but I need space. How much space? I don't know that either. Andrew stood up, and when he spoke, there was a quiet determination in his voice. All right, go, think, but know that I'll be here waiting. Always. And if I decide I can't, then at least we'll know we tried. Isabel left the office without looking back, but she could feel his eyes on her, could feel the weight of the decision she would have to make. She spent the rest of the morning walking through the streets of New York, trying to organize her thoughts. The city seemed indifferent to her personal drama, people passing by hurriedly, each dealing with their own problems, their own impossible choices. It was during this walk that her phone rang. An unknown number. Hello? Isabel, this is Victoria Montgomery. The name surprised her. Victoria rarely spoke to her directly and never by phone. Hello. Did something happen? I need to talk to you. It's important. About work. About my brother. About you. About the impossible situation you've gotten yourselves into. Isabel felt her heart quicken. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Meet me at the Hudson Yards Mall food court in 1 hour. Come alone. Victoria. 1 hour, Isabel. It's important. The call ended, leaving Isabel with more questions than answers, but there was something in Victoria's voice that suggested urgency, almost desperation. The Hudson Yards Mall was busy, as always. Isabel found Victoria sitting at an isolated table, wearing dark sunglasses that couldn't hide the tension in her face. Thank you for coming, said Victoria, without preamble. What do you want to talk about? About the scandal that's about to explode, about what Robert Drummond is planning, about what this will do to our family. I don't understand. No? Then let me explain. Drummond has photos, Isabel. Photos of you two together. Photos that out of context suggest intimacy. Photos that, along with information about your kinship, could destroy not just Andrew but the entire family. Isabel felt the world spin. What photos? From the event at the Carlisle, from the dinner you had, from the moment he put the necklace on you. Photos that alone might be innocent, but together with the truth about who you are, they become scandal. Exactly. And Drummond is planning to leak everything to the press tomorrow, unless Andrew resigns today. What do you want from me? For you to end this, for you to step away from my brother before he destroys everything our family has built. Victoria, it's not that simple. No? Then let me make it simple. You have two options. You can distance yourself voluntarily, and I guarantee you'll have financial security for the rest of your life, or you can continue with this madness and watch Andrew lose everything. Are you blackmailing me? I'm offering a way out, for all of us. And if I choose the second option, then you'll discover that not all love is worth the price it demands. Isabel studied Victoria's face, looking for signs of bluffing, but there was a seriousness there that frightened her. How much time do I have to decide? Until tonight. Drummond will implement his plan tomorrow morning, unless he receives Andrew's resignation today. And if I tell him about our conversation, you can tell him, but that won't change anything. The photos exist. The truth about your kinship exists. The scandal will happen anyway. Unless I disappear. Unless you do the right thing. Victoria stood up, leaving an envelope on the table. There's a check in there. Enough for you to start a new life anywhere you choose, far from here, far from him. Victoria, think carefully, Isabel. Some choices have no return. When Victoria left, Isabel remained alone with the envelope. She didn't open it but could imagine the value. Probably more money than she would see in her entire life, the price of her freedom, or of her prison. Depending on the point of view, she returned home in a state of shock, finding Connie preparing dinner in the small kitchen. "You're home early," observed her mother. "Some things happened." "What things?" Isabel told her everything, about Robert Drummond, about the photos, about the blackmail, about Victoria's ultimatum. Connie listened in silence, and when her daughter finished, there was a deep sadness in her eyes. "So we've reached the end," she said simply. "What do you mean?" "I always knew this day would come. The day when you would have to choose between love and survival. Mom, what would you do?" "I would do what I've always done. Protect who I love. Protect Andrew or protect myself. Sometimes, my daughter, protecting someone means letting them go. Do you think I should accept the money? I think you should decide if you can live with the consequences of whatever choice you make. That doesn't help me." "It shouldn't help. Some decisions only you can make." That night, Isabel couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about Victoria's words, about Drummond's threats, about Andrew's vulnerability. She thought about the love she felt, the love she received, the impossibility of the situation. When the sun rose, she had made her decision. She dressed carefully, as if for battle. Perhaps it was. She took the envelope Victoria had left, but didn't open it. There would be time for that later. She arrived at the Montgomery mansion at 7 in the morning, before any of the other staff. Andrew was in the office, and from his condition it seemed he hadn't slept either. "Good morning," she said, entering the room. "Good morning, have you decided?" "I have." "And?" Isabel approached him, and when she spoke, her voice was firm, determined. "I choose you." "Isabel." "No, let me speak. I know it's complicated. I know it's wrong. I know it could destroy everything. But I also know it's real, and I can't live pretending it's not." "Are you sure?" "I am. But we need to leave here. Today. Now." "Why?" "Because Drummond has photos. Because he's going to leak everything to the press. Because Victoria offered me money to disappear. Because if we stay, we'll destroy not just us, but your entire family." Andrew processed the information in silence. When he spoke, there was a quiet determination in his voice. "Then let's go. Just like that? Just like that. Now. Before it's too late. And the company? Your family. Your life? My life is you. The rest is just rest. Now let me choose too. I choose you. Above everything, despite everything. Are you sure? You've chosen. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." They looked at each other, and in that moment, Isabel knew there was no turning back. They had crossed all the lines, broken all the rules, defied all conventions. "Where will we go?" "Wherever you want. Far from here. Far from all this. And then? Then we'll figure it out. Together." Andrew came closer, and when he kissed her, it was as if the entire world disappeared. There was desperation in the kiss, but also hope. There was fear, but also love. When they separated, both knew they had made the decision that would change everything forever. "Let's go," she said. "Let's go." And so, as New York woke up to another day, Isabel and Andrew prepared to leave everything behind. Because some choices are bigger than the consequences. Because some loves are greater than the rules. Because sometimes loving someone means being willing to lose everything for them, even if that someone is the wrong person, even if that love is impossible, even if that choice is the one that will define them forever. The decision to flee was made in a matter of minutes, but the preparations required a surgical precision that only Andrew, with his experience in complex business, could execute. While Isabel returned home to say goodbye to Connie and get the little she considered essential, he activated a network of contacts he maintained for emergencies, discreet lawyers, offshore accounts, documents that would allow a quick and silent exit from the country. "Mom," said Isabel, finding Connie in the kitchen, "I need to leave. Today." "Leave to where?" "I don't know. Far away." "With Andrew." Connie stopped washing the dishes, facing her daughter with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "So you've chosen. I have. Is he worth the price you'll pay? We'll find out. Isabel, my daughter, are you sure this is love and not escape? The question hit Isabel squarely, because if she were honest, she no longer knew how to distinguish between the two. Love for Andrew, or escape from the impossible reality? Genuine passion or rebellion against the rules that had always governed her life? I don't know, she admitted, but I know I can't live without finding out. And if you discover it was just an illusion, then at least I'll know I tried. Connie dried her hands on the dish towel, approaching her daughter. You know I can't go with you. I know. But I want you to know that I understand why you stayed with Charles, even knowing it was impossible. You understand? I do. Sometimes the heart is stronger than reason. Sometimes it is. But sometimes the heart also deceives itself. Mum, if it goes wrong, you'll always have a home here. But I hope it goes right, my daughter. I hope it's worth it. They embraced, and Isabel knew it was a farewell. Not necessarily forever, but for the life they knew, for the simplicity they had cultivated, for the security that silence provided. When she returned to the Montgomery mansion, she found Andrew in the office with a small suitcase and a determined expression. Ready? He asked. Ready. We have 3 hours before Drummond implements his plan. Enough time to reach the airport and take off. To where? Portugal. I have contacts in Lisbon, businesses that can give us initial coverage. Then we'll decide the next step. And if they find us. They won't find us, at least not immediately. But fate, as always, had other plans. As they descended the mansion stairs, carrying the 2 small suitcases that contained everything they considered essential, they found Charles and Margaret waiting in the main room. They weren't alone. Robert Drummond was there, smiling with a satisfaction that made Isabel shiver. Going on a trip? Asked Charles, his voice cold as ice. Business matters, replied Andrew, keeping his tone calm. How interesting, because Drummond here has some things to show us. Drummond stepped forward, taking an envelope from his suit pocket. Very revealing photographs, and some information I think you'd like to discuss as a family. There's nothing to discuss, said Andrew. No? Not even the fact that you're planning to flee the country with your own sister. Half-sister, corrected Andrew, and there was defiance in his voice. Half-sister you intend to turn into a lover. What a beautiful story for the newspapers. Drummond, Margaret intervened. You said you had a proposal. I do. Very simple. Andrew resigns from all positions in the company, transfers his shares to me and signs a confidentiality agreement. In exchange, the photographs and information remain secret. And if I refuse? Then tomorrow morning all of America will know that the Montgomery heir is fleeing the country with his own bastard sister. The silence that followed was heavy. Isabel could feel the weight of the gazes, the judgment, the contempt. But she could also feel Andrew's determination, the way he positioned himself slightly in front of her, as if wanting to protect her. There's something you don't know, said a voice from the stairs. Everyone turned to see Victoria descending, carrying a folder of documents. There was something different in her posture, a seriousness that wasn't common for her. Victoria, said Margaret, what are you doing here? Preventing you from making a terrible mistake. What mistake? The mistake of believing Robert Drummond. Victoria approached, looking directly at Drummond. You didn't tell them everything, did you? I don't know what you're talking about. No? Then let me tell them. About the debts you have with the Colombian cartel, about the dirty business you've been doing with company money, about the embezzlement you caused in the Miami project. Drummond turned pale. You can't prove any of this. I can't. Then explain this. Victoria opened the folder, spreading documents on the table. There were photographs, bank statements, signed contracts. 3 years of investigation, Drummond. 3 years collecting evidence of what you really are. You're a crazy bitch. I'm a crazy bitch who has enough evidence to put you in prison for 20 years. Charles approached the table, examining the documents. Is this true? Every page, said Victoria. Drummond isn't interested in protecting the family. He's interested in saving his own skin. Lies, shouted Drummond, but there was desperation in his voice. Lies? Then explain this contract with the shell company in the Cayman Islands. Explain these transfers to foreign accounts. Explain why you so desperately need to take control of the company. Victoria, said Andrew, why did you do this? Because you're my brother. Because even when I disagree with your choices, I won't let them destroy you. But yesterday you offered me money to disappear, said Isabel. Yesterday I thought Drummond was just an opportunist. Today I discovered he's a criminal. There's a difference. Drummond was cornered and knew it. He tried one last card. Even if all this is true, it doesn't change the fact that they're siblings. It doesn't change the scandal this will cause. You're right, said Victoria. It doesn't change that, but it's also no longer your problem. What do you mean? Because you're going to disappear. Today. Now. You're going to take your photographs, leave the country and never come back. I'm not going anywhere. Yes, you are. Because the alternative is me delivering all of this to the FBI in 2 hours. You wouldn't do that. I would. And I will, unless you disappear. Drummond looked around, seeking support, but found only hostile faces. Even Margaret, who had always been his ally, had stepped away. This isn't over, he said, heading for the door. Yes, it is, replied Victoria. It's been over for a long time. When Drummond left, a strange silence took over the room. Isabel and Andrew remained standing, side by side, but now it was no longer about escape. It was about choice. Thank you, said Andrew to Victoria. Don't thank me yet, because now we have to deal with the real situation. What situation? You two. What you really want. What you really feel. Victoria, said Margaret, this is none of your business. It's not? Then whose business is it? Yours? His? You've spent years pretending this family is perfect, that our rules are sacred, that appearances matter more than happiness. Appearances do matter, insisted Margaret. To whom? To the neighbors, to the partners? To people who don't even know our names? To ourselves. To you perhaps, but not to me, and clearly not to Andrew. Victoria turned to Isabel. And you? What do you want? I want to be with him, said Isabel, finally finding the courage to speak. I know it's complicated. I know it's wrong by most standards, but it's what I feel. And are you willing to face the consequences? I am. What consequences? Asked Charles. What consequences could be worse than lying to ourselves? Dad, said Andrew, surprised by the intervention. No, let me speak. I've spent 20 years keeping the secret about Isabel's paternity. 20 years watching you grow up separately, seeing the feelings develop, seeing the tension accumulate. You knew? Asked Margaret. I knew she was my daughter. I knew you would eventually feel attracted to each other. I knew this moment would come. And you did nothing to prevent it. I did. I tried to maintain distance. I tried to create barriers. But it didn't work. Because you allowed it to work, accused Margaret. Because some things are greater than our desire to control. Charles approached Isabel, observing her with a look that mixed sadness and pride. You look like your mother, in the eyes, in the determination. Sir Charles, or father if you want. It's past time we accept the truth. The truth, asked Margaret, and there was pain in her voice. The truth is that I loved Connie, that Isabel is my daughter, that you are siblings, that you love each other despite this, or perhaps because of it. Charles, said Margaret, you can't be suggesting that we let them choose. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. This is madness. Madness is pretending that love obeys our rules, but they're siblings, half-siblings, adults, free to make their own choices. And what will people think? People will think what they've always thought, that we're a complicated family with secrets, with problems, but maybe this time we'll be a family that chooses truth. Charles, said Andrew, are you sure about what you're saying? I am, because I've seen what happens when we deny feelings. I've seen what happens when we try to control the uncontrollable. And if it goes wrong? And if it goes right? And if you're happy? And if you discover that love is more important than rules? Dad, said Victoria, what are you proposing? That they stay, that they accept what they feel, that they face the consequences together. But nothing. Drummond is gone. The blackmailer has disappeared. What remains are two people who love each other, and a family that can choose to support them or destroy them. And you choose to support? I do, because I've already lost too much time trying to control what can't be controlled. Margaret looked at her husband, at her children, at Isabel. There was pain in her eyes, but also something that could be understanding. This will change everything, she said. It already has, replied Charles. The question is whether we'll accept the change or fight against it. And if I can't accept it, then you'll have to choose between your prejudices and your family. The silence that followed was long, heavy. Isabel could feel the weight of the decision, the importance of the moment. It wasn't just about her and Andrew. It was about an entire family deciding if it could transcend its own rules. "All right," said Margaret finally. "You can stay. You can try. But don't expect it to be easy." "We never expected it would be," said Andrew. "And don't expect the world to understand." "We don't expect them to understand," said Isabel. "We only expect them to let us be." "Then be," said Charles. "Be happy, be honest, be yourselves." "Thank you," said Andrew, and there was emotion in his voice. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you discover if it was worth it." "It already is," said Isabel. "Just the fact that we can try already makes it worth it." "Then try, but try right. Try with honesty, with courage, with love." "We will try," promised Andrew. "We will," agreed Isabel. "Then it's decided," said Victoria. "We're going to be an even more complicated family than we already were." "We are," laughed Charles, "but at least we'll be an honest family." "Honest and crazy," added Margaret, but there was the outline of a smile on her lips. "Honest and crazy," everyone agreed. And so on a New York morning that had begun with plans for escape, it ended with plans to stay. Isabel and Andrew didn't flee from their truths, but faced them. They didn't deny their feelings, but accepted them. They didn't choose ease, but honesty. 6 months later, they were in Washington, D.C., supervising the construction of a new development. They had decided to work together not just in personal life, but also professionally. Isabel had formally taken the Montgomery surname, not as a wife, but as a recognized daughter. Andrew had officially become her half-brother, but also her partner in every sense. "How do you think we'll explain this to our children someday?" asked Isabel, watching the construction site from the window of the trailer that served as a temporary office. "We'll tell the truth," replied Andrew, approaching from behind and embracing her. "That love is more complicated than rules. That sometimes we have to choose between what is right and what is true. And if they don't understand, then we'll hope they have the courage to make their own impossible choices." "Do you regret it?" she asked, turning in his arms. "Regret what?" "Having chosen the truth." "Never." "And you?" "Never. Not even on the difficult days. Especially on the difficult days." Because there were difficult days. Days when judgmental looks weighed more than usual. Days when whispered comments were crueler. Days when they questioned whether they had made the right choice. But there were also days when they woke up in each other's arms and knew it had been worth it. Days when they laughed together at some inside joke. Days when they worked side by side and discovered they were even more compatible than they had imagined. "Isabel," said Andrew, "can I ask you a question?" "Always." "Do you think we're happy?" "I think we're complex, but complexity isn't unhappiness." "It's not." "No. Complexity is real life. Real life is messy, complicated, full of contradictions. And you like real life?" "I like our real life, even knowing it will never be simple, especially knowing it will never be simple." "Why?" "Because simple is overrated. Simple is for people who don't have the courage to face their own truths. And we have courage. We do. Proof of that is that we're here, together, against everything and everyone, against everything and everyone. Forever, forever." Andrew kissed her, and in that kiss was everything they had lived, everything they had faced, everything they had chosen. It wasn't a simple kiss, but it was a true one. When they separated, Isabel looked out the window again. Washington, D.C., stretched around them, a city that had also been born from an impossible vision, from a dream that many said would never work. "Andrew," she said, "do you think we'll be able to build something lasting?" "I think we already have." "What?" "A story, a family, a truth." "Is it enough?" "It's everything. Everything. Everything that matters." And it was true. They had built something that didn't fit into any conventional model, something that defied the rules, something that made people feel uncomfortable. But they had also built something real, something honest, something that was theirs. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was true. And sometimes, thought Isabel, watching the sun set over Washington, D.C., truth is more important than perfection. Sometimes truth is the only thing that matters. Sometimes truth is enough. And that afternoon, in the construction trailer in Washington, D.C., with the man she had chosen against all odds, Isabel Montgomery knew she had found her truth, and that it was more than enough. It was everything,